It's very common for people on the outside of abusive relationships looking in to wonder, why doesn't she just leave? And of course, I don't want to leave the guys out on this. While why doesn't she just leave is kind of the stereotypical question, there are plenty of people out there wondering, why doesn't he just leave? Men are often abuse victims as well, so I just want to acknowledge that. In this video, I'm going to go over several reasons that leaving an abusive relationship isn't always so simple as it might seem to people on the outside looking in. This video is both for people that have a loved one that just won't leave an abusive relationship and they're wondering why and wondering if there's anything they can do. This video is also for abuse victims that maybe are having a hard time leaving or maybe beating themselves up for not leaving sooner. I want to be able to validate those people, validate the reasons that maybe they stayed or are staying longer than they feel they should. Welcome to Looking Behind the Mirror, where we explore narcissism and abuse and take our lives back as we make sense out of nonsense. As a quick disclaimer, everything I say is based on my opinions and my personal experiences. I'm not a professional, and if you're really struggling, I encourage you to seek professional help. I am providing links below for you. And the links below that I usually provide are also good resources for people that are looking for a way out of an abusive relationship and they haven't found a safe path yet. I just want to throw that in, especially for this video. Victims of abuse exist on a spectrum, from abuse victims that don't realize they're being abused at all, abuse victims that really believe that their partner or whoever it is that's abusing them is great, awesome, infallible, or loving, caring, whatever, and that everything bad that happens is the victim's fault. And then on the other end of the spectrum are abuse victims that are completely aware that they're being abused, probably living in an enormous amount of fear, feel very trapped, and just don't know how to leave, or they are just too afraid to leave. I'm going to begin this video on one side of that spectrum and then kind of move over to the other side. And I think the side of the spectrum of abuse victims that don't think that they're abuse victims is the side that's most misunderstood by outsiders looking in. And that's what I really want to explain and explore the most to help people that don't understand this maybe understand what they're seeing in their loved ones that are in this situation, so they can kind of understand why this is happening. So for an abuse victim that doesn't realize that they're an abuse victim, we kind of have to put ourselves into their shoes. Abuse victims didn't wake up one day and say to themselves, boy, I sure would like to get in a crappy relationship where I'm treated horribly and yelled at and abused and insulted all the time. That would be great. No, they probably met somebody that was really great to them, very loving, said all the right things, swept them off their feet, treated them awesome, did things for them, made them feel like $1 million. And then that relationship probably slowly over time, or maybe a little quickly, became something very different. The more trapped they became, or the more committed they got to the relationship, the more it started to evolve. And when this happens, when you fall really hard for somebody in the beginning of a relationship and you give your trust to that person and you really buy into everything that they're presenting to you, and then over time, slowly, one little thing at a time starts to be a little confusing. Maybe this awesome, amazing person one day out of the blue just starts yelling at you because you bought the wrong flavor of ice cream. And it's something that they've never done before, seems completely out of character, and just comes out of the blue. It's easy for somebody that's really in love and bought in and completely trusts their partner to just kind of shrug it off and think, wow, they must have just been in a really bad mood or something. That was weird. They've never yelled at me like that before, and over something so silly. Or they might think, wow, ice cream flavors are really important to this person. I've never seen them so upset. I better be more careful next time. But as time goes on, these little moments where things don't seem to quite add up, or the abuser seems to act out of character, these moments become more and more common. And, where's the point where you stop and say, hey, I'm in an abusive relationship? I mean, if you're with a partner that treats you amazing and is just awesome 364 days a year, and one day a year they start yelling at you and telling you that you never do anything right and you never think about them and you're a piece of crap. I mean, is that an abusive relationship? Some might argue it is. But if you're really in love and really bought in and really excited about this person and you completely trust them, and they yell at you and treat you like crap one day out of the year, is that really worth leaving the relationship over? Okay, what if it was 2 days out of the year? What if it was 7? What if it was an accumulative month out of the year? Would that be okay? At what point do you stop and say, this relationship is abusive. I don't want to live with this person anymore. An abuse victim has to draw that line somewhere. And unfortunately, in most abusive situations, that line is slowly creeping up over time as the abuse victim learns to tolerate the way that they're being treated and learns to just excuse and shrug off and ignore and justify these what seem to be aberrations of character, but what soon start to become really just an exposure of the person that they're actually with. At what point do you say to yourself, I'm an abuse victim. I'm with somebody who is abusive. And often in these types of relationships, as the abuser's behavior escalates, the abuser is also working very hard to convince the victim that these things are the victim's fault, that the abuser is upset because of what the victim has done, because the victim picked the wrong flavor of ice cream. And how could the victim not know? How could you not know what my favorite flavor of ice cream is? I told you what it was 3 years ago. How could you forget? Don't you ever care about me or think about what I like? When someone is yelling at you, insulting you, raging at you, very angry with you, there are always 2 ways that you can perceive that. You can perceive it as something is wrong with them or something is wrong with you. If someone's upset with you, maybe you did something horribly wrong. Maybe they have a good reason to be upset with you. Or maybe they're unreasonable or abusive or way too demanding or have ridiculous expectations. But when somebody is aiming their rage at you, you have to decide, whether consciously or subconsciously, which it is. Is it your fault or is it their fault? And when this is somebody that you love and trust, and as they are raging at you, they are simultaneously convincing you that you're the one that made them so angry, you're the one that messed up and did some terrible, awful thing, it can be really easy for victims to blame themselves. And when victims blame themselves for the abuse, victims think that they can also fix it if they just try harder, if they just listen better, if they just pay more attention, or just, okay, I'm never gonna do that again. Next time I go shopping for ice cream, I'll make sure I get the right flavor. Completely not thinking about or anticipating the fact that next time they get yelled at, it's gonna be because they use the wrong brand of detergent. Everyone is different in how much abuse they will take from somebody that they love and care about before they realize that they're being abused, before it finally dawns on them that it's not their fault and that there's really nothing they can do to fix it, that they're not the ones that are bringing on this abusive behavior. So on one end of the spectrum, this is a huge reason that abuse victims don't leave, or that it takes a very long time for them to be able to admit to themselves and acknowledge that they are in an abusive relationship. If an abuse victim doesn't realize they're being abused, then you really can't expect them to even realize that they should leave. Now, just a little further down the spectrum would be somebody that maybe is realizing that they're not being treated right, that something's not quite right, that they're being yelled at a little too much, that their partner is angry a little too often, but they're deeply deeply in love or emotionally attached to this person. If you want to help somebody that's in an abusive relationship, you really have to accept and have empathy for the fact that they may be very, very emotionally attached to someone that maybe you really despise. And I think if you know somebody that is very important to you that is being abused, it's easy for you to despise the abuser, and it's easy for you to see all the reasons that the abuse victim should just leave and just forget about what this person thinks. But you really have to put yourself in the shoes of the abuse victim. Abuse victims sometimes, often, unfortunately, still have very, very strong feelings of attachment to the abuser. It's really painful to give up on these relationships. Like I said a little bit ago, these relationships start out sometimes as something that seems to be a dream come true, the answer to our prayers, the perfect person, somebody that just loves us and treats us amazing, and then it slowly turns into a nightmare. Well, all that attachment and love and excitement that built up in the beginning of the relationship doesn't just go away overnight. This is really, really devastating and disappointing and heartbreaking to somebody to start to slowly come to the realization that this wonderful thing we thought we found is really actually something that's terrible. All these things that we thought we could trust and love don't really exist. That's not an easy thing to accept. And on top of this may also be a trauma bond. And I've made videos about trauma bonds. So, I mean, I could and have made entire videos about trauma bonding, so I won't go too much into that. But a trauma bond is actually an addiction to the relationship, to the abuse cycle, an addiction to chasing that high that we got in the beginning of the relationship. Because an abuser isn't usually horrible and abusive all the time. It's much more normal for an abuser to be pretty okay most of the time, and sometimes really awesome a little bit of the time, and abusive only part of the time. And when you're in an abusive relationship, you're being treated with cold indifference or overt cruelty most of the time. And then when you're being treated as if you matter, being treated with affection and attentiveness, that can feel so good and feel like such a relief from the cold indifference or the cruelty that it actually becomes like a drug high, and you actually become addicted to chasing those moments where you feel like the way that you did in the beginning of the relationship again, and you fool yourself into thinking that you finally arrived somewhere and that everything's going to be awesome from then on. Of course, it never is. That's how an abusive relationship works. And that's how trauma bonds keep people attached to people that are hurting them. Now, as we move a little further down the spectrum, there are people that maybe want to leave the relationship or are seriously considering leaving, but it's not that simple. If we've really combined our lives with somebody, maybe married them, or we live with them, we have a mortgage with them, kids with them, there are a lot of things to consider other than just breaking off a relationship. Breaking off a relationship with somebody can mean losing all your friends. It can mean losing in-laws, an entire group of in-laws that maybe you happen to like. It can mean worrying about whether or not you're going to lose your kids. It can mean losing your home. Maybe you're really good friends with your neighbors. You've got to give up all those relationships maybe. What about your pets? What about your job maybe? Or everybody you know at church, or whatever social life you have that is associated with your partner. Every relationship is different, but many relationships have many, many things attached to them that if you break off that relationship, you're also losing or potentially losing a lot more relationships that go along with it. And that's a lot to consider. That can be a really huge, devastating loss by itself. And I don't think it's fair for anyone from the outside looking in to say, why doesn't she just leave, when they're not considering all the other things that that person could potentially be losing in the process. It's really not fair to think of it as something so simple and obvious when you're not really in that person's shoes, understanding everything else they have at stake. Now, as we move even further down the spectrum, this is where I think society is beginning to understand a little bit more. And this is, of course, an area where the abuse victim really does want to leave. But as we are coming to understand, when an abuse victim is trying to leave an abusive relationship, that is the most dangerous time in the relationship. Abuse victims are always in a little bit of danger at pretty much any time in the relationship. But when the abuser feels like they're losing control of the abuse victim, there's really no telling how desperate an abuser may become. Some of them start to panic in a sense, and there's really no telling what they're capable of doing. All of them are different. I mean, some of them have lines that they won't cross, but you won't know what those lines are until you're in that situation. I don't know, I don't have data on it, but I'm sure that many abuse victims who were either injured or had their lives ended, probably many of them didn't see it coming at all. I think that the act of trying to leave kind of exposes or uncovers a person that, as abusive as they may have been during the relationship, is somebody that the abuse victim has maybe never encountered up until then. An abuser that is losing control can suddenly become an entirely different person and make the abuser that the victim has known all along look like a saint compared to how they are acting now. So leaving an abusive relationship can be a real risk. This might not even be a good idea considering the circumstances. And in my opinion, no one except for the abuse victim really has the right to think that they know what the right answer is for that victim, because nobody can really tell that victim what's going to happen when they try to leave. It has to be a decision that the abuse victim makes on their own because it's a risk that they're taking. What are you doing? And in this same vein, I want to talk about one of the biggest problems that abuse victims have when they're trying to leave, and that's lack of support. Imagine being in an extremely abusive relationship and nobody believes you. Everybody's suggesting that maybe it's your fault, or they're saying things to you like, it takes two to tango, or, well, what did you do to make him or her so angry? Or, oh, it can't be that bad. Or, kids need two parents to raise them. Or just work on it. Divorce is never the answer. Society is full of extremely invalidating voices and people that don't understand abuse, and people that live in some kind of la land where everything can be fixed and everything is somehow your fault if you're the one that wants to leave. Imagine being an abuse victim, living in a home with somebody that maybe you have a joint checking account, if that, and that's your only access to any funds whatsoever, and you're completely dependent on this person, and you don't have any friends or family that you can turn to that really take you seriously, that are really going to be there to help you, that really believe you. Where are you going to go? How are you supposed to leave this person if you have no resources and nobody to support you and nobody believes you and people are trying to tell you to work it out and stay put and you don't have any money? I mean, why do you think that some people don't leave? It's just not that simple, especially if your abuser isn't actually beating the crap out of you every day, especially if it's, quote, just emotional abuse. What leg do you have to stand on? If you can't afford to leave and if you have all these things that you're going to lose and you don't have anyone to call and you don't have anyone to turn to, I mean, you wonder why an abuse victim doesn't leave? That's often the reason. So for anybody out there that is wondering why a loved one doesn't leave, make sure at the very least that you're someone that they know they can count on if and when they decide that they're ready to try to leave. I'm not saying that being supportive is automatically going to help someone decide to leave, but I am saying that if you are one person that they know will believe them, will listen to them and won't sit and judge them and say, well, how could you be with this person in the first place? Why are you staying so long? What's wrong with you? If they know that you're a safe space that they can go to when they're ready, that's a huge, huge, huge help all by itself. And outside of that, remember to have compassion and empathy for people in abusive relationships. Like I said before, nobody wakes up in the morning and decides that they want to be stuck in an abusive relationship. It never starts off that way, and it is not a matter of intelligence. Anybody with emotions and emotional vulnerabilities can end up in an abusive relationship. And once you're in a little too deep, it's just not that easy. It's just not as simple as just leaving. I think that people tend to be judgmental against people in abusive relationships because it makes them feel safe. It makes people feel like, well, that could never happen to me because I'm not that stupid, or that could never happen to me because I would just leave. It makes you feel kind of safe to think that, to be judgmental towards people that are stuck in those situations. But anyone that's actually ended up in a situation like this will know, oh, I guess it's not that simple, is it? If you're looking for a way to support my channel and you've been considering professional therapy, BetterHelp is offering 10% off of your first month of service if you sign up using the link below in my description. And if you use the link below in my description, I will also get a one-time commission. So that'll help me out. It'll help you out if that's something that you're interested in doing. I hope this helps. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and comment below any ideas you have for me for future videos. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you like this video and would like to see more like it in the future. Until then, thanks. Bye.